Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Compelling Conversations podcast. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by the first recurring guest, Raudric. Raudric, thanks so much for being here again.
It's awesome to be here, man. It's awesome to talk to you again.
Yes, yes, we have a lot to discuss because a lot of interesting ideas that you've brought up to me. And I
Yeah.
suppose we'll begin on images, man. Um, Images.
That article I sent you, what came
Yeah,
up when you were reading that? What was coming up for you when you were reading that? Were there any thoughts you had?
yes, I did. Too many thoughts, but I guess we'll begin with one. There's this documentary by Val Kilmer. He released it like about a year ago. It's called Val. It's on his life. And there's this scene in that film where he's just kind of talking to his camera, and he's saying that the Native Americans would say that an image would like capture a person's soul.
Oh,
Yeah, and then there's this other film with Johnny Depp in it. It's called Minamata, and he plays a photographer in that film. And he says the same thing that Val Kilmer said, but then he says the part that gets left out is it also takes the soul of the person that captures the image. And I thought
oh
that was really
man.
deep too, because it's like,
Yeah,
I mean, that says something about artists of old, the painters
yeah.
and sculptors, and I wonder if yeah, like that's just something that really got to me. And I've always wrestled with this idea of images. There's just an unease about it. Um it also like brings up the connotations of like false idols and stuff,
Yeah,
just
idolatry.
falsehood.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah. One of the things that came up initially when you said that was I've seen this quote talked about a few times, and it's I'm gonna paraphrase it. It's every advancement of technology is um, an extension and also an amputation. And
Ooh.
I was like, yeah, I was like, oh yes. And I've been seeing that also with this idea of images, how when we do capture our
Are you there? Wow, I suppose your image just kind of got captured in the moment.
yeah,
Yeah, it
right
got
there when we
captured
were
in the
talking
moment,
about
man.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, there
Go
was
ahead.
something that happened there. There was a capture and there was a release, right? Like,
Yes.
I guess I could have allowed that to like stir up some kind of anxiety or something like, oh no, what's happening?
Yeah, no,
Um,
but keep going, man. Keep going.
but it could just be liberated, right? Nothing has
Yeah.
to, yeah. Yeah, just different ways to apply stuff like that. That's cool. Images. Capturing ourselves. Can I talk about I was thinking about with images, like if a computer were to look at a captured image of us, is this going too far? Or we wanna should I fill this in? Should I fill this in?
It's up to you. There's no awkward moments. So whatever you feel like sharing, you go for it.
Yeah.
I'm here to just have a real cool conversation with you.
Yeah. So I'm really into the digital doppelgangers, as you know, like these
Yeah. Do you want to explain
sort
that?
of yeah, there's just different ways that this happens, but anytime that you it's like this idea that anytime you record yourself anywhere that there's this digital version of you that gets updated, right? Like Facebook has these very specifically, they have these things that are like considered ghost pages where if there's an image of you that someone else posts, it goes to that. The facial recognition software adds it to that ghost page.
Mm.
So that's just like one of these digital doppelgangers sort of that exists, right? That it's benign, right? I think it improves their facial recognition models, if anything. Which I don't have an issue with facial recognition software. Um,
You
yeah, but
know,
beyond,
yeah.
yeah, what were you saying?
You can finish what you were gonna say.
Oh, I was going to go into the sort of expansion on that. Were you about to add more to that?
Well, I just wanted to share this one thing. The article you sent me, it talks a lot about like films even, and how like when movies were first being released, there were like actors in Russia that were like very uneasy about seeing themselves on screen. They're like,
Yeah.
that's not me, that's something else. And
Oh
I
man.
thought that was
Yeah,
particularly eye-catching.
to
Yeah.
see yourself so intensely reflected to yourself, you know,
Yes. And what
in
that
an un
article, yeah,
yeah.
my
Well, I was
bad.
just gonna say it's unnatural because
Yeah.
it's out of the present moment, right? So it's kind of like a 2020 hindsight, right? You can look at yourself and see exactly what you were doing and be in the present at the same time. So
Yes.
it can be, I think for a person who psychologically never confronted that, it would be like what is that? You know?
Yes. I was just watching a film with my dad. It's called The Intern, and it's got Robert De Niro in there. And in that film, he's like a very like soft, like grandpa like character. And just like a regular old man. But it's like if it wasn't for the films that he had made all those decades ago, never would have known like how hard he can be, how cool
Yeah.
he can be. And like
Taxi
Godfather
driver.
Part Two,
Like,
yeah, Taxi Driver, yeah, it's like, but I would never have known that if the films didn't capture that. So it's like that article even discussed it, like it immortalizes a person, but it's
yeah.
not quite the same person
It doesn't have,
necessarily.
yeah, it's not always the same person because it's like again, that present past difference. Um, yeah, there's like a constant evolution of a person where images can kind of freeze them in a certain place in time.
Yeah, I don't know if
That's
I've
kind
ever
of
sh
interesting.
uh-huh.
People can be like trapped in their own image, and hold themselves in a particular place in the past.
Yes, and I'm actually really glad that you mentioned that because um a lot of times like the images of myself, I kind of orchestrate the way that they look when it comes to like the style or the pose or whatnot, the colors even. And that's
Yeah.
usually because I was really inspired by Renaissance art. And even later like art like I don't know if you're familiar with like the famous paintings of Napoleon. Like
Oh, I
Napoleon,
was
like
literally showing my wife them today at a wedding.
really,
Yeah. Yeah.
wow,
I
like
had
you
my
could
hand in
see,
my jacket and she was like, "What are
yes.
you doing?" And I was like, Napoleon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if you're familiar with this particular one where he's like dressed up like a Caesar, like a Roman emperor, and he's seated on a throne.
I think I
Yeah,
saw that one today. I think
yeah.
when I was looking at them.
When I studied the
Yeah.
life of Napoleon, it was like that man very much wanted to be
Oh man.
immortalized.
Yeah, I think
And
yeah, absolutely. Do
yeah.
you think that's like a just kind of going in a different direction? Do you think like lives have purpose? And do you think Napoleon's purpose was fulfilled through his immortalization? Like, are some men here to be immortalized?
Ooh, I like that. I really like that actually. And I would say I think so. I think so. And when you read about Napoleon's life, his greatest inspirations were Alexander, Caesar, and
Yeah.
Frederick the Great,
Yeah.
And but
I
here,
saw this. Oh, keep going. Keep going.
my bad.
You're okay.
There's this interesting thing that happened to Napoleon. He had conquered a particular place, and his soldiers brought him the sword of Frederick the Great, and he refused it. He didn't take it. And then, like years later,
Mm.
somebody asked him when he was in exile, Napoleon, they brought you the sword of Frederick the Great, one of your inspirations, but you didn't take his sword. Why didn't you? And he said, because I had my own. And so it's like that's a man that
That's amazing.
is going to be
Yes.
immortalized.
Yeah.
He knows who
Yeah.
he is, kind of a thing.
Yeah. It's like Diogenes telling
Yes.
Alexander the Great that like if I were, or he, at first, well, yeah, at first he was like, if I were not Diogenes, I would also wish to be Diogenes, Alexander the Great. And then that other story, I don't know if you've heard this one about him looking through the pile of bones. And then he
I
tells
haven't
him,
heard this one.
you haven't
Tell
heard
me.
this one. So it's like Diogenes is digging through a pile of bones, and Alexander goes up to him and he asks him, "What are you doing?" He's like, I was looking for the bones of your fathers, but I couldn't distinguish them from the bones of slaves. It's like
Ooh, damn,
it's like
that's
he's so himself that he can react like as himself to in wherever he is. He can refuse the sword of his idol. In his
yeah,
own way. Not that he was worshiping Alexander or anything, but it was just this other great man who was also immortalized, and he was like, just obstinate to him. It was like yeah,
yeah,
immortalization.
yeah. It's a really fascinating thing. And another thing I wanted to mention was in the Western tradition, it seems like there is this uh, love to be immortalized. I mean, you could
Yeah.
say that really about humanity, but I see it especially with the Western tradition. And what's fascinating to me is, like in like the Muslim tradition, I could be misquoting, but I think like the Prophet, peace be upon him, he has this thing where he's like, it's enough of a tribulation for a person that people point fingers at them when they pass by. In
Oh
other
man.
words, he favored for man obscurity than he did fame, which I think
Yeah.
is something to think about.
No.
It's like a
Yeah.
different perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah. No, I love that as well. I do think in the West there is kind of this just narrativization that people have of their lives, right? Whenever they go through lives, they kind of tell themselves stories, and they will keep themselves in certain stories, but it's overall a narrative, and I think I've noticed that that's much less present in anything that's sort of Eastern, right? Um, or not. I do kind of consider Islam to be a part of the Western canon, right? I
it
do think
is. Yeah,
Islam is profoundly impactful on the West, right? You can
yeah.
see like it's everywhere in Europe, right? It's um,
It's the
yeah,
spark that created the Renaissance, quite literally,
absolutely,
you know?
absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But it's interesting that you mentioned the Eastern traditions because uh I'm curious about, you have an interest these days, you're telling me about effigies and about
Oh yeah,
Tibetan Buddhism and all of that. Shall we get
yeah,
into that?
yeah. We can get into that. I'm not too clear on the centuries of the dates, but I do know that in the Tibetan tantric traditions that they were for a long time practicing human sacrifice, and human sacrifice has more recently been something that captivated me. Not that like I'm interested, like it's kind of like why would a person do that, right? I walk around with so much. I really do feel love for people, right? And it's because of God, right? And things like that. So it's like to sacrifice somebody, right? To look at another human being and do that to them. Like, what were they thinking? And then to know how Buddhism is today and to know that there's or even Tantra today, right? There is sort of some very extreme ideas in Tantra, but it is still like today, it's not like people are going around and sacrificing people anymore. So,
Yeah.
I was like, how did they make that transition? How did they reconcile something like human sacrifice to be what it is today? Um, yeah, that's really where I am with the effigies, and there's many. Well, there's different sects in Buddhism. I don't know if you know that there's
Yeah.
different, like in most things, right? People do different stuff in different places. Um, So one of the sects, the king was like, we're no longer going like the human sacrificing was kind of crazy to him. He understood the necessity for violence because he was fighting rebels in the early part of his life, but he got to a point where the sacrificing was um, too much, and he called it a demonic. It was a demonic. What was the word? I don't want to misphrase it, but it was a demonic
Demonolatry, wasn't it?
it was just
Demonolatry.
a demonic way to practice tantra, right? So he
Yeah.
he banned all the monks and the priests from practicing these human sacrifices, and it was like, well, later on they got invaded by other people. So how do you tell these people who you're like you're not supposed to kill people, right? How do you then go and tell those people We now have to kill these. Like we do. We if these people are invading our country, we have to fight them back in some way, right? Because I don't like there was no UN, there was no entente relationships or
Yeah.
detente relationships between a lot of these places. It was just people taking care of their little kingdoms. And so I'm really interested. I'm still like reading about it and really trying to grasp all those ideas and hold them together. But yeah, I love seeing like how they were able to or what they did in order to do that. And it was a lot through these things, effigies, right? These sort of however they could uh, symbolically represent whatever it is that the ritual or ceremony was a part of. So there was one that's really interesting to me, and they made like thousands of these paper figures of like the enemies, and then they had this whole ceremony and like burned them and all this stuff. Um, and I think the idea of effigies is kind of similar to these digital doppelgangers that we have, right? They're our effigies, and um, our relationship to these effigies is kind of important. I think stepping into the future, like I don't see us separating from the technology. So we need to bring more awareness to the things that are affecting us because a lot of people I feel
Yeah.
like are living through the effigy or living through the doppelganger and not really bringing like soul or spirit or the wisdom that comes from those things into that.
I'm
That was a
curious,
long, yeah, go.
when the Tibetans torched the effigies, did that liberate something about them?
I believe it was to inspire them. It was the effigies were supposed to represent their enemies, so I think it was to like it was like a instead of sacrificing right slaves or something before a battle, you do this big ceremony with the effigies, and it does the same thing. For one, it's a very morale boosting thing. I think for anyone going into combat to see right like something to excite people and I think it's an interesting application. It's a changing of that energy, right? To sacrifice something, to not throw that onto a human being, to have like you are a thinking, conscious human being and you have this creative aspect of you, right? You can project these thoughts and feelings onto the effigies and burn them and still achieve the same effect.
Yeah. It's yeah, effigies. Like I'm just thinking, I don't really think in say like in the Abrahamic tradition there is like an idea of effigies. You can see that very much in like pagan and even now you
Yeah,
mentioned like a
and
dharmic tradition. So
yeah.
that's fascinating to me. You mentioned to me once that the British said some things about what they
Oh,
saw when they
yeah.
came to that African country. Do you want to
Yeah.
share your thoughts on that?
Yes. So it was when the African country they were moving into certain parts of Africa and trying to control them. And there was a certain part of Africa, I believe it was called Benin, Benin. Um, and this country was kind of the British say that they were known for like they practice human sacrifice when they walked up to the cities that like the stench you could smell the stench from outside of the city as these things typically say things like that but they would find I don't want to get into details about these things but just really gruesome ways of what it looked like sacrificing these people in order to please some deity, right? Something that they needed to sacrifice human beings to. Um, yeah, and reading that account, it was terrifying and revealing at the same time. It was like an apocalypse, right? One of those revelations that like human beings do these types of things to each other. Um, and it comes from a religious place for them, right? That same place that I have when I go and commune or like commune in any kind of way, right? Or I worship in any kind of way, right? They're coming with it with that same from that same place that I am, and it's just yeah, it's very strange to me. It's a very different way of viewing the world or life. Yeah, and I'm learning these things.
What do you think it says about us then if you make that connection between images,
Um,
doppelgangers and effigies? What does that say about us, do you think?
with so with effigies and digital doppelgangers, I believe it says that like the human is, for one, much more than we give it credence for being, right? A lot of times people will reduce man to animal. They'll say you're just an animal, it's like, "Nah, I don't think I'm just an animal." Like I look at my dog, and my dog doesn't dog doesn't really do the same things that I do.
Yeah.
Or my cat, she just runs around and tries to hit me. She's a cat. That's all she thinks about doing. She's a little kitten. So all she wants to do is play with stuff, and it's like you as a human being have this like a mediator factor in your brain where you can like stop thoughts, other things from happening, and you can focus in on something, right? Like I'm sitting here and talking to you and not running around my house looking for food or something, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like we're much more than like this, being able to, as a human, project thoughts, right? This idea of projection, right? You can or even anticipate other things, right? These are like we have an incredible ability for anticipation, right? You see people driving on freeways and not everyone is dead today. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like we have this incredible ability for anticipating. Like put a dog behind the wheel of a car. Dogs can't use cars. That's a bad example. But there's just we're much more than what I think we tell ourselves we are.
Yeah, and that could be good and bad, right?
Right, because yes, it's really dangerous when I guess you have a lot of power, but you don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, and
Um,
that's where you can introduce the shadow, eh?
Absolutely introduce some shadows there. Yeah.
Yeah, you know
Um,
what I'm talking about. Yeah, Jungian stuff.
Jungian shadows.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't know if you're
man.
familiar with Jordan Peterson. He discusses this where like apparently Carl Jung had this idea that within an individual's shadow, like the roots could go down deep to hell, and that's where you
Oh,
get
yes.
beings like
Yeah.
Nazis and stuff. Yeah.
Yes. There's a Solzhenitsyn quote that Jordan Peterson says, the line between heaven and hell is drawn down man's heart.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and I was like, yeah, absolutely it is. You do get things like Nazis, but you also have like incredible humanitarian works, right? You have people who are concerned and passionate about the environment, right? And then you see it might not be directed in the right place. It's like
Yeah.
they'll go and attack paintings instead of build something great. We've gone, I think, since the invention of the steam engine, right? Like we've gone so far in such a short amount of time. And I think that's a testament to like human possibility, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but what do you think like all of these things such as like the way you talked about effigies in some sense, and this might be a bit of a stretch, but the way I perceive it is images for us because it's just so it's everywhere, I think. Images for us are in a way like a sacrifice, like an effigy to like this thing. I don't quite know what
Yeah.
that thing is, but actually I think it was I don't know if I mentioned this, but in that article that you shared it talked about how when there was this unease that people had with seeing themselves on screen, what the media did was they decided to create a culture that would get rid of that unease. Like, oh, these are celebrities. Here's the glamour. Here's the gossip. And they
Yeah.
did that
Yeah.
to rid. And so what we're doing is we're chasing that, whether we are consciously or unconsciously. That immortalization ties in with that as well. And so it's
Yeah.
like, what does that say about us? Because in a way, it
What will
seems
that
like we're
say
just
about
digging a
us?
pit, you know?
Do you think we're digging a pit? So like think this. Yes, I wanted to tell you, like, it seems like everyone's becoming immortalized, right, through the technology, right, and how much
Yes.
access they give it to their lives, right, though. So,
Especially in the past couple years, right? Like
yeah, it's
especially.
just ramping up more and more, and it's like, what will that say about us in the future, right? And it's like, I guess it kind of depends on what we decide to do with this sort of immortalization technology, right? If we use it to glamorize things that are kind of celebrity culture, right? Like what the Kim Kardashians or um, just that popular. I won't say popular culture. Popular culture is real important, but just like the if we glamorize things that aren't important, we kind of won't really have things that are worth remembering, right? It'll be
Yeah.
the what's immortalized of humanity will just be like rubbish, right? Just be trash.
That
Or
yes, yes, that element of novelty kind of disappears in a way.
yeah, absolutely, because it's contrived. It's not real. It's uh, it's decided already, right? The things I think a lot of popular culture is already decided. It doesn't have to be, right? It just is right now. Um, like a lot of the stuff people are forced to kind of see are these things that are contrived and they lack novelty. It's like I feel like I hear a lot of people talk about how such few amazing movies get made, right? After, I don't know, the last awesome movie I think I really saw that was new was like The Neon Demon by Refn.
I don't know what that
Uh,
is.
it's just some weird. It's a very weird movie. It's about like these models, and it like shows like it's a very weird movie. It's like the models are vampires or something or witches, and like they drink people's blood. But it was a very beautiful movie. I think there's like a yeah, very very wonderfully shot.
Yeah.
He's a awesome director. But I feel like there has been a lack of novelty, like you said, that's been introduced in films, right? You think about the period of films that was like the late '60s to the early '80s, and you just have the most insane, crazy stuff you could think of come out.
Yes,
Very weird movies. I love getting into those kinds of like those older movies where like people
absolutely.
felt more
Yeah.
free to explore in what they were immortalizing.
You
Um,
know what's one thing that does I've been reflecting on lately is even like if you do make it to that threshold and you do become what you've always wanted to be, so to speak, you also end up becoming what you don't want to be. And the way I look at it is, I don't know if you're familiar with the man named Nadir Shah, but he was a very iconic Persian king who even Napoleon took inspiration from him. But this man was like poor, impoverished peasant, and he climbed his way to the throne, the Persian throne. So it was like a pretty big deal for this
yeah,
man.
it's
Yeah,
a
it's a very interesting
huge
life
life
that he
change, and
has.
it's yeah.
Yeah, and but the interesting thing was when he became king, he brought his soldiers to his little village and he announced to them, "Hey, like I was poor and now I'm the king of Persia." And I've literally shake the doors of the West and the East. And he's like, "So let this kind of be like a testament to people that don't like look down on a poor man. He can become something." But
Mhm.
Nader Shah never really did anything, as far as I'm aware, to like improve the situation of the poor. So it's like he
Oh
became what he wanted to be, this
yeah,
great king of Persia. But at the same time, whether he believed in it or not, he also became what he wouldn't want to be, right? Someone who
yeah,
kind of disregards the
just
poor.
doesn't. Yeah,
And Marlon Brando, even, you can look in his life as well. I mean, he became the actor, right? The big Hollywood actor,
hmm
but also he became something he didn't want to become either at the same time. So it's just something
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. We have to really be careful about where we decide to step, right?
Yeah,
I think the future holds like a lot of possibility for humanity, right? But we also have the capabilities to like destroy the planet, and make it
yeah,
unlivable. It's
yeah,
as above, so below.
yeah. I like how you mentioned that. And I'm curious, you mentioned Solzhenitsyn before, and
Yeah.
I have taken some interest in that man's works
Oh
lately.
man.
And one of the things about his life that I think is profound is he never quite, from what I understand, he never quite pointed fingers of blame.
I
It
don't
was
think
more
that
so
was
like,
what he I don't think that solves the issue.
yeah,
That was one of the third weighing. Um, I do this thing, and it's any time that I encounter a dichotomy, what I do is you go beyond good and evil, right? Right there in the in that title. I love just saying that quote, just beyond good and evil.
that's an
Anytime I
interesting
do
book.
that third weighing, yeah. It's like one guy, Jason Reza Georgiani, I mentioned him last time. He was talking about the left wing versus the right wing. And he was like, no, we like he was talking about upwingers, becoming an upwinger instead of picking a side, choosing to look forward instead of at all the issues of the past, really saying, what do we need to do to fix the issues that are present today? And then going forward from there, not pointing fingers and being like, this is your fault. This is your fault. Nothing gets resolved that way.
Yeah, yeah. And the fact that, someone like Solzhenitsyn went through what he went through and he
Yeah.
still remained
Yeah.
like equanimous. He had
Yeah.
that equanimity about him. I think
That I
that's
think
interesting.
those are stories that a lot of humanity take they enjoy those stories, right? If you the big one is Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ on the cross, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. He's you have that approach, and then if you go people like Zarathustra, right? Even though Zarathustra was like outcasted and weren't necessarily interested, he was like this is what God wants, and trying to still bring um like lovers of wisdom to God, um or how they say God in Zoroastrianism,
Yeah, I think, well, in the Persian it's Khuda, you know.
Khudal.
Yeah, or actually in the Zoroastrian faith, Ahura Mazda.
Ahura Mazda, yeah,
Yeah,
Ahura
yeah.
Mazda, and then you got the Serpenta meshes. Yes, I have really Zoroastrianism is something I really want to understand. I think that is a very interesting story, the story of Zarathustra
Yeah. It's I'm a huge fan of the mythologies of Persia.
of Persia.
And
I've been looking at Perun. I don't know if that's how you say his name. He's like I don't know. It's I was just reading about it and I was like, oh, he's a Persian. He's an Indo-Aryan or Indo-European kind of guy. Um, Perun. He's like a lightning storm god. And whenever I see those guys, I'm like, who is talking about this? Because
interesting.
I think those cultures are connected, like the Indo-European cultures. I love seeing those threads throughout the
Yeah,
from
yes.
from like where Persia originally was. Um, I don't know. I've heard that Persia was like the Persian culture, the Persian people started in the Caucasus Mountains, and the Caucasus was Persian. Um, and then like the Rus came in, and you know how the Rus are. Um,
I don't know if you know this, but Iran literally means land of the Aryans.
yeah, I've made that. Yeah, and I'm super not in like a weird way. I'm really interested, or I feel like the Western canon has a lot of connection to that place right there, right? And it's like I love going back to that. Even like the Rig Vedas. There's a lot of stuff I've heard from the Rig Vedas that I've been like, wow, is that really where like because it's like a very old text, so it's like, are these where people are getting these ideas from?
Yeah. I'm curious, Roderick, do you have any closing thoughts? Anything you felt like you wanted to say you didn't get a chance to, or anything on your
Oh
mind you wanted to
no.
express?
I said a lot of stuff. Yeah. Um, no, just that I think there's a lot of stuff that we said in there that was that yeah. Do you have anything that you wanna say?
Good question, man. Good question.
Or
Just
bring out before we close out? Yeah.
yeah. Not exactly, but I really like this quote that you have, which is pick up the torch and put down the sword.
Yeah,
Do
pick
you
up
want to
the
tell us
torch.
what that is about and why
So
you
that is this you can barely read it. Pick up the torch, put down the sword. Um it is really about choosing to bring light to others instead of or just my life, right? Even my own issues, even within myself, bring light within myself instead of coming at everything I think is like an inconvenience or like why am I like that? I don't have to come at it like that. That's a sword approach to my inner life. Bring a torch there, say what is going on here, why am I doing these things, or why am I thinking like this? And you can really do that with everybody in your life or any relationship that you have with anything, right? Whether it's work, family, school, business, you can put down the sword and pick up the torch.
I genuinely love that. That's very like optimistic attitude. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, we gotta bring light.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, good speaking to you again, Roderick, my friend.
you too, man.
I suppose until next time then, eh?
Yeah, yeah. Until
All right.
next time.
Will you take care?
You too.
Thanks.